Today I'm going to show you how to make a double layer woolly hat or beanie on a knitting loom. It's very easy to do. Anyone can do it.
For this project you will need 1. A knitting loom that was designed to knit hats. 2. Yarn in the correct weight for your knitting loom. I'm using Serta Jewel Spun, which is an iron yarn. 3. A knitting loom hook. 4. A knitting loom stitch marker or very small elastic band. 5. A stitch marker or safety pin. 6. A wool needle. And 7. Scissors. Okay, let's make it. Make a slip knot. Place it on your loom with a knot on the inside of the loom. We will be using an E-wrap cast on. Wrap the yarn around the pegs from back to front.
Be careful not to accidentally let go of your working yarn because you will lose all your stitches and have to start again. So for this initial round, you cannot stop and go do something else.
I will meet you back here when I've finished wrapping around all the pegs.
I have now wrapped all around the stitches, and now I'm just going to carry on wrapping around them. You can potentially do the whole round in one go, but just remember, if you let go of your working yarn, you will lose everything you've done. So I prefer not to do that. I like working 6 stitches at a time at the most. So I'm wrapping 6 stitches, and then I'm going to pull the bottom loops over the top loops. So this is called the E-wrap stitch, and it results in a twisted knit stitch. Oh, there's one more. And now I'm going to carry on and wrap the next 6 stitches. And as I said, you can do as many or as few as you want at a go. I quite enjoy doing 6 stitches at a time. Okay, and this is pretty much all there is to making this hat. It is that easy. You are going to keep going now, doing this until you have a tube that measures twice the length of your favorite beanie. My favorite beanie is approximately 15 centimeter in length, and so I will carry on knitting like this until I have a tube that measures about 60 centimeters. I have now reached the desired length, which for me is about 60 centimeters. I am now going to show you how to do a 3-step cast off. So the first step is to create the double layer.
Place a stitch marker on any one of the pegs on your knitting loom.
So I've got my knit marker, my stitch marker here, and now I'm going to trace down.
Now, I don't know why at this point in time I decided to demonstrate this step standing up. Of course, this part would be much easier to do on a table. Anyway, the point is that you need to trace down the stitches until you find the corresponding loop on the cast-on edge to the top stitch that you have marked with your loom's stitch marker or small elastic band. Mark the bottom loop with a stitch marker or safety pin.
Okay, there we go. I have placed my stitch marker at the corresponding stitch to the stitch marker at the top. So I'm putting my hand through the tube. I'm going to grab the stitch marker and pull it up. Then I will place the loop with the stitch marker on the peg where my other stitch marker is, but of course I'll take the stitch marker off first. And then I am going to place all the other loops, all the other cast on loops on the pegs. This is a fairly simple task, and I will meet you back here when they are all done.
My cast on stitches are now all back on the loom. Something I forgot to mention is to make sure that your working yarn is towards the outside of the loom. Now take all the bottom loops and pull them over the top loops. I'm going to go ahead and do all of those, and I will meet you again when I have finished.
Okay, that is step 1 done. Now I'm going to carry on with step 2, which is to cast off half of the stitches. So I'm going to put one stitch on top of the stitch next to it, and then put the bottom loop over the top loop. The next stitch goes onto the stitch next to it, and the bottom loop over the top loop. The next stitch goes onto the stitch next to it, and the bottom loop goes over the top loop. And I will carry on in this way until I have done all of them.
To measure how much yarn is needed for the third and final part of the cast off, wrap the working yarn around the loom plus an extra 10 to 15 centimeters, and then cut the yarn. Now thread the yarn through all of the remaining stitches on the loom. The yarn goes below the loop. Catch it with a knitting hook and pull it all the way through. I will meet you back here when this round is done. I always like this step. Remove all of the loops from the knitting loom. Once all the loops are off the loom, it's time to pull tight the working yarn to form the top closure of the beanie. At this point, it would be a good idea to decide what would be the inside and the outside of the hat. Considering that there is a brim, this is what my hat would look like one side out. Or I can turn it inside out, in which case it would look like this. It is quite possible to have it as a reversible hat, maybe even with half the knitting done in one color and half in another. One just needs to be careful how to finish it off so that it will look tidy on both sides. To fasten off securely, thread the yarn through a wool needle. First, I'm pulling the working yarn as tight as possible so that there isn't a hole at the top of the beanie. Then I weave the working yarn through the end loops. Not through all of them though, but maybe every fourth or fifth one. That helps to pull it even tighter. And then, for a few times, I will pass the working thread through the loop that is created, forming knots that will keep the yarn in place. I will do this 4 or 5 times. Then all that remains to do is to get rid of the tail ends. I am going to pass them through between the 2 layers of knitted fabric as far as they will go. Then pull through to the right side, straighten the hat, and snip off the end. This way, the tails are now neatly hidden between the 2 layers of the hat. Do the same for the other tail end.
What do you think? I like it. I like it. I like the multicolored with the fuchsia. I love fuchsia. And it's gonna go really well with my outside coat. I like it.